Okay, welcome everybody to another session of TMF Week 2023. Super happy that everybody is here to join us for another great session. I see a lot of familiar names in the attendee list. So throw a quick hi in the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from. Let us know how excited you are for this session. You can throw that into the chat. My name is Oliver Pierce. I'm a Director of Marketing here at Muncham, and I am your host today. Although I will be handing over the reins to our panelists, and more specifically Robin, who is our moderator today, in a few moments. Again, if you have questions throughout today's session for the panelists, if there's certain topics that maybe they address live on the line that you would like to go into more detail, please throw those into the chat. We'd love to hear and field questions as they come in. Robin and our panelists will also see those questions coming in, so please take a look at those. Today, we're going to be focusing on a subject that I think is under-addressed when it comes to conferences. I think there's a lot of discussion happening now around how to engage non-TMF'ers, as we call them, or those that are in sort of non-core TMF roles. So today's panel is on how we can improve TMF culture as a whole, and engage non-TMF'ers. So with that, I'll hand it over to our panel and Robin to kick things off today.
Great. Thank you so much, Oliver. Good morning to everyone. Good early morning for some, a little bit later in the morning for others, but happy that everyone's here and really excited to talk about this topic. My name is Robin Farmer. I work at Grell, which is located in the Bay Area in California. I've been working in industry now for coming up on my 19th year. Actually, I was doing the math yesterday, so a little surprised by that, but definitely, happy to talk about the TMF culture and dive more into that. But before we do, I'd love to introduce the rest of the panel. So David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Ives. I am the clinical practice lead at Daylight Solutions. Yeah, I love this topic, so happy to be here.
Thanks, David. And Anusha?
Hi, everyone. My name is Anusha. I'm currently an eTMF manager at Moderna. I have been in the industry for about 5 or 6 years, and this is a super favorite topic of mine, so I'm really excited to share all my learnings with you.
And Jared Brucelin, I'm the TMF manager at Intellia Therapeutics. I've been in the industry for about closing in on 10 years and just love to talk about the culture of the TMF.
Great. Thank you. So I didn't mention that I'm actually the director of the Clinical Systems and Records Management Group at Grell. So when I think about TMF culture, I really think that it's something that's always been there, but maybe in more recent years has become more of a topic as the TMF is becoming more visible, more integrated throughout our companies. So it's definitely just an important topic for us to sometimes step back from some of the other topics and just think about who we are as TMF'ers. Of course, engaging non-TMF'ers, we'll dive into that too today. But I think it's best for us to start off with just what is TMF culture to us? What does it mean for us individually? What it means for us in the companies that we work at? And we'd love to hear more from the panel about that. So Jarrett, would you like to start us off with what TMF culture means?
Yeah, TMF culture in itself is just the norms and customs of an organization or an idea. So for TMF, for me, it starts really with the TMF, those that are involved with the TMF, whether you're singularly overseeing the TMF or you have a group of people. It really needs to be a passion, kind of that burns in your heart, kind of like the glow of a lit cigarette on a moonless night. Really just has to shine, and that excitement, that culture that you bring to the TMF will just spread throughout the company. So I really think it's just the engagement that you have with folks, whether they're involved with the TMF daily or just monthly through meetings. I think what you bring to the table of your culture of the TMF is really the key to making it successful.
That's great. I like that. We need to coin that phrase somehow. It's very a very nice view of TMF culture.
Yes, it's burn.
Yes. I like that. All right, David, you want to add something to that maybe?
I don't know. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, I think for me, it's like, it's not something, uniquely, it's not just like innate to most organizations, right? So Jared's point about like bringing that energy, it's like most people are not going to care as much about TMF as we're going to care about TMF. And I think it's sort of establishing sort of that common vision and then the expectations and benefits that come along with that for the team, right? I mean, if everybody's not on the same page of what the vision, what the expectation and the benefits are, it's not just going to like organically become an awesome place to have a TMF, right? So I think it's important to sort of set the tone as TMF leaders in our organizations and just like continuously drive that message home. It's like a never ending thing, I think.
Absolutely. I like these words, passion and care, all really fit into this space when we talk about culture. Anush, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it also comes from, do they understand the responsibilities when it comes to TMF? I mean, in my experience, I've seen range from, I think the CRO does that, and then, what is the TMF? So I think it really also comes, whether you're joining an organization new or you are, you're sort of coming there to influence that culture as a new person. Maybe, they never had somebody dedicated for TMF and you're trying to get a pulse check on what do people think about the TMF here. Whereas you may, encounter some organizations that are very organized and they get what the point is, they know what they're supposed to do. So you'll see a range of involvement with the TMF and a range of understanding. It's always important to know, where are we starting? What's our baseline? Because it's not, you can talk TMF to anyone. I can talk TMF to anyone all day, but it's not going to make any sense to them if I don't know where I'm supposed to start with them. Do we start with the ABCs or do we go into the level of research papers?
Very true. Just wanting to utilize the chat here. So we don't have any polls today, but in the chat, I think it'd be great based on what our panelists have said. If anybody wants to add, maybe kind of a, yes, this resonates with me. This is what I feel TMF culture is, or this is what I see within my organization, or no, not at all. Maybe I need to implement some of these things, or if there's other ideas around it. So definitely would love to see that come up on the chat as we continue. One thing I want to talk about, so I really want this type of conversation to really build on one another, right? So we started off with the culture, we're going to get into engaging as well, but what regulations within our environment, right? We're a regulated environment as it is, and TMF even more so, probably maybe than other areas, but altogether we are. What regulations in our space or just changes that we've seen over time that maybe have affected our culture? There's obviously TMF always needs to stay on top of what's happening, what's changing, what's new in the industry. One example I'll just give that's on top of my mind, even just with the implementation of eTMFs was a big culture change. I started off working in paper and measuring by yardsticks how much paper we were going through in a daily time, and 50 or more TMF folks working to process that documentation. That was a big shift and change, but there's other things as well. So maybe David, do you want to kind of talk about some changes you've seen over time that affected the culture?
Yeah, I think there's been a pretty big shift from, Robin, I think you and I shared a little bit in our previous conversations about like both sort of starting in that paper world, right? And like, it was fine. It was fun. It was nice to be in those big rooms and such, but like, it was primarily like a clinical problem, right? And I think that's like one of the biggest shifts that's come about in part because of the expectation of regulators. I mean, I've seen an inspector ask a very senior medical director, like, hey, where is that in the TMF? And the answer was, well, I don't do TMF. And he was like, well, what's your name? Let me write that down. So I think that push from regulators has actually sort of helped, right? It's sort of helped us develop that culture where it's like, it's important, it's foundational to sort of prove what we're doing and how we're doing it and serving the patients that we're all trying to serve, right? So.
Right. Yeah, definitely agree. Jarrett, want to add a little more to that?
Yes, just the knowledge of, personal health information, how redaction works, even, what are the rules with retention of documents? How long should you have those for? So those are always changing, and you want to make sure that your TMF is up to date on those, so people are not deleting documents when they should not be. Really, those fundamentals that are key.
Absolutely. Yeah, Nisha?
So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach here in terms of how it's changed. Is in the last few years that I've been working, I've only worked in eTMF. I did work on the other end of the things when I first started in TMF, sort of scanning paper documents and digitizing them. But I think in the land of eTMF, what I've seen change over time is the amount of integrations we can have with other systems to pull documents in. And that's something that we're constantly learning and growing, regardless of what eTMF system we use. So I think trying to keep up with the many integrations and the many ways in which we can get trial data to, and reinforce the fact that it is still part of the TMF, because, often people think that it's just one system. If it's in this system, that means it's eTMF. And we all know that's not the case. So still trying to engage with different groups. And part of that engagement is how do we integrate the data from those systems to become TMF content? What are we using our indexes for? And how are we defining that relationship? I think that's been a growing, ever-growing space for us to learn a lot from in terms of how, how are all of these things connected to what TMF it really is?
All great points and all very, very true. I think just to shift gears just a little bit here, what I really feel is maybe the main point of this talk and really building on this after we kind of introduce this topic point is the engaging piece, right? So when I think about engaging non-TMF'ers, really, everyone essentially can be a TMF'er in a sense. If you're holding documents within our space, we obviously would think of you as a TMF'er, but as leaders in this space, which I feel like if you're working in the TMF, regardless of title, you're doing some sort of leading role, you're leading the area. We do have other key departments, and I think over the years, more departments, as you mentioned, Anusha, are part of the TMF, or even if documents are held elsewhere. As TMF'ers, we're expected to kind of recognize that and have an idea of how they're kept. So, but if you're not directly in the TMF space, but do have documents that are important to be in that space, then I think we kind of think of that as a non-TMF'er, and you obviously need to be engaged. So would love to just hear some ideas around, departments that maybe aren't in the TMF day to day, but do have content that belong in the TMF. Therefore, it is important that you, be kept apprised of what's happening with the TMF and what the right way is to get the documents there or hold them wherever you're holding them, as we all know. Just curious to hear about some ideas on getting that engagement. Anusha, if you just want to kick that off, that'd be great.
Sure. So one of the things that I've done in the past is this was kind of like a long project, essentially working with all functions to understand that, first of all, they contribute documents to the TMF, and then understanding what they contribute to the TMF. This was a project that was sort of set off to create an index plan for the company, so we knew where these documents were coming from. So I think at first, when I went into meeting with every single function, you would have like a kickoff meeting, just let's say like meet with everyone and then sort of set expectations on what they should be providing us. When I went into those discussions, I realized that there was a general non-understanding of what they need to be doing for that, because there were people that, like I said before, I think the CRO does that. I don't have access to the TMF. I don't know what, documents I'm supposed to be sending. Oh, I send that to this mailbox and this person files it for me. So first of all, we went all the way back to why is it that you are contributing and why is this relevant? In an inspection, someone is going to ask the functional lead to show, pull up this document in the TMF and show me where it is. Where did you file this plan? Where did you file this communication? They're not going to ask the TMF person to show them around. They want to know that their functional teams know how to do that. So it starts from the source of explaining to them, why do you need to know this? Because that's the question they have. Why? Why do I need to know that? Why do I need to contribute? Why do I need to, be doing these things? And I think it goes back to that question, because I think we talked about this earlier too. TMF is something that we can all be very passionate about, but we can't expect everybody to be that as passionate as we are about TMF as they are. So it's going to that level of explaining why they need to know these things that I found to be most useful in those conversations. And then it helped them understand, okay, now I get it. Now I can tell you the information that you need, and I can go connect with this XYZ person and try to move this forward. So, at the end of the day, really what they're looking for is, what is this? What purpose is this for me? And why is this relevant in the big picture? It's easy to get lost in the details. We're all very detailed people. So it's nice to step back and see the bigger picture at times, especially in light of those inspections. And something that we always try for is like constant inspection readiness, right? So that's, it's like a journey. It's not just a destination. So we want to make sure that people are understanding that point right from the get-go.
Great points. I saw a lot of hand claps there, Anusha, as you were going through that. So preaching to the choir and they're responding, right? David, you want to add a little more to that?
Yeah, I think Anusha's spot on. I mean, it's meeting people where they are, right? Like at a macro and a micro level, because I think a lot of times TMF is like assumed to be something. And I think we need to walk people to what that should mean for them. And I think it's more of like showing people how the TMF can support their job, right? Like, and I think there's somebody popped something into the Q&A, I think it's Meredith, about overcoming priorities, right? Like study data over TMF. And like, I completely understand that. I think the reality is a modern, in particular modern eTMF can be like a value asset, right? Like you can actually show people like on a micro level, again, like, hey, here's some ways you can find things that you're going to find valuable to your job. They're going to support you moving forward, right? So I think it's trying to find little wins for those teams to like help them get engaged. And then, wrapping that around sort of that macro process of like oversight and everything like that. But it's, we've still got a long ways to go, in my opinion, in terms of like eTMF and its usability to support project execution. But there's already some really cool stuff that we can do today that people are not necessarily taking advantage of. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll definitely maybe speak a little more to that later. But Jared, if you just want to kind of wrap us up with engagement.
Yeah. What I do is I remind them, maybe a little analogy of when they were a child in school, or even their own children doing all this homework, they do all this work, and then they don't turn it in. So same thing, they're doing all this work for these clinical trials. If they don't submit it to the TMF, it did not happen. And so do they want to be the ones that have to tell the subjects, the patients, that, oh, sorry, we couldn't get your drug approved because I forgot to turn in my work? So you want to make sure that, like Anusha said and David said, that they are aware of the high importance, the responsibility that they do have for the clinical trial. So their little piece of documentation, while to them may not be that important, but in the big scheme of things, the big picture, yes, the inspectors are going to come. They're going to want to know, where are these documents? And so having that engaging, whether, one-on-one training with people, engaging work instructions, things that get them to better understand how the TMF works, is really a way to really get people understanding the TMF.
I like that, Jared. I'm going to have to use that homework analogy because
I'm gonna have to copyright all my sayings.
Jared coming with the phrases today. No,
gotta get everyone's engaged now in this conversation. They're like, "Ooh, what's going to come up?"
Right, for sure, because that makes so much. I mean, that really just encompasses what I think we think all along, right? We already do the work, and then of course the final step is just having everything in the right place and checking your work and all of that. It seems so simplistic, but as we all know, it's really a hard role. So I think adding on to that, kind of the hot question of the day is escalation. So we do all these very nice things for engaging, as we've all mentioned. We hear support, giving great analogies that people that could resonate and maybe simplify it to like, oh yes, when you think about it, it is like my homework. I want to get this in. Like Anusha says, engage from the get-go. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, we're still having some issues, right? So again, as I say, we're in these lead positions. Escalation. Has there ever been a point in time where, despite your best efforts, escalation just needs to happen? And more so, how did you do that? What did you do? And then in the end, to get more buy-in, what was kind of the approach for escalation? David, want to kind of start with that topic?
Just name and shame, Robin. Name and shame. I really love this because I think, it's such a funny thing. So actually, I think one of the previous sessions, there was a bit of a discussion of this. ETMF really highlights your problems and your gaps like super quickly, right? Like you can't hide. Like you can't be like, oh yeah, I put that in the TMF, like, and then somebody had to go check the paper, right? Like, I mean, it's not, but really I think it's setting the tone that it is not trying to catch people. It is trying to make sure that like, as a team, we know the expectation, we're delivering on the expectation. And when we're not, we understand why. Because I've never, when you articulate, especially to like senior leaders that like, look, truly the problem is, we don't have enough people to do this, then you got to find ways around that or accept the sort of risk, right? And I think the other thing is really important for those organizations that work closely with CROs is having that transparency, not just like within your walls, but like within the broader team's walls. Because sometimes there's that tendency to like keep each other at arm's length in a way. And I think that's sort of exactly the opposite of what we should be doing is like, let's collaborate together. Let's figure out how to make this better for us as a team. So I think escalation is key, and it's got to be really clear of when do we escalate, who's going to see it, how are they going to see it? Because the last thing anybody wants is to be like called out in front of their boss in some weird, like forum, and then they feel like attacked or offended. It needs to be really clear that like this is a team approach, and we need to be willing to take a look,
Absolutely. Jared, would you like to add some color to that?
Sure. So I subscribe to the business philosophy of Jim Collins. He wrote From Good to Great. Essentially, we want to make sure we have the right people on the bus. And so if you're constantly running into the same people over and over within different departments, and you've worked through everything, you've done the trainings, you've engaged with them on the importance of the TMF, and it still is not occurring, then that's the time that you need to escalate it to the managers and just have that frank discussion. We want to make sure that these studies are successful, and we don't want to get impeded by roadblocks. So much like David said, you're going to engage with them, show the importance of these studies, and sometimes you just got to kick them off the bus and move and find someone else who's willing to step up, because it's too important for people just to say, oh, I'll get to that document later, if you've done everything that's important and that's necessary for them to understand what they have to do. And I see this a lot with QC reviews. We have different departments working on quality reviews, and they don't prioritize it. I'll get to it. And meanwhile, you have a TMF plan that stipulates exactly what you have to have done in a certain time period. And if you took that same philosophy of, oh, I'll get it done to the other plans that are written for the studies, people would go crazy. So, the importance of the TMF can't be forgotten. And I think that's what really is critical in these discussions with other departments.
Absolutely. Sure. Anusha, you want to add something to escalation pathways?
Yeah. I mean, no. I mean, it's not a surprise to anyone here that we're all fans of documentation, right? So I think it's important to have your escalation pathway documented in the right place which means that would be putting it in your TMF plan, how you plan to escalate issues. And obviously this isn't something that you just throw on the plan and call it a day. It needs to be something that, gets that functional buy-in that we've been talking about, making sure your leaders are aligned on, this is the pathway that we'll follow. Documenting it and being transparent about it will take it a long way, because these are documents like the TMF plan that will actually be trained on. So study teams will have agreed that this is what will happen if things are not going according to the way that we've laid it out. So I think, having transparency up front, but also making sure that you're documenting how exactly you'll be escalating is key, because I have seen, at least in my limited inspection experience, that sometimes those questions do come up. So this didn't happen the right way. What did you do about it? What was your cadence for escalation? Like, do you have that documented somewhere? That's a very easy win if you have it documented somewhere, so you can show proof that you have done something about it. And this is what, this is the proof of that escalation, and this is the method that we follow based on our procedures.
Yeah, Nisha, you bring up a great point, because if it's not documented, it didn't happen, right? We say that a lot about the documents itself, but it can actually go for internally as well. So, great point there. I want to just talk about a couple things I saw in the chat. So I'm looking at notes. I'm looking at the chat. Two things I saw that I think are good just to mention. One point was brought up that escalation only work if management is also involved as well, and I agree with that. So I think of the points that are being made that sometimes we don't even have to go as far out as those other functional area groups. Sometimes just internally having that buy-in, and then of course having that support is helpful. A great point. And one point that I saw that I'll just jump in on if I was answering this question as well, there was a point made about having TMF champions, and I think I have seen that work well. It is a little bit of work in that I think it's good to identify maybe an actual role that's that champion, so that if that role changes, if that person moves into another role, it's still just, the champion is always X person, whoever sits in this role, not just that person by name, is a great way to kind of keep up with champions, and then, make that a part of their role as well, right? So knowing that if you sit in this role, you were deemed a TMF champion, meaning that, at least you can, be a point of contact within your department for TMF, because I think, ClinOps generally is very familiar with TMF and very familiar with the idea of submission of documents, whatever that looks like for you within your company. They're just kind of familiar with that process. Doesn't always mean that everything's perfect, but they at least, you can kind of talk shop with them. But then you move out some of these other areas, they're not as familiar. So even, I have a document, I place it on the shared drive, whatever the case is, that's as far as they go with it. But there's so much more that needs to happen. We know that, right? So having a champion is great, because they are the ones that can kind of get TMF information and stay up to date on what's happening with the TMF, and then sometimes disseminate that throughout the team. And sometimes that happens with escalation not always having to be a bad thing, but just escalation being a escalation of information to other groups. So good points in the chat, good points from our panel. Maybe to kind of take a step back from the more heavier side of this, maybe just some ways about actually building culture as well. So we've kind of talked about what the culture is, escalating, but just things that we can do as leads to actually perpetuate that and actually build the culture. I think kind of going back to our original question of just what is the TMF culture, and I think within our teams, we kind of know what it is, we feel it, we live it. Even just attending something like TMF Week is a part of our culture, because we need to connect with other, TMF'ers, as we say here, just to hear more about what's happening in all of our worlds. And I think it's always great to hear like stories, because then you feel like, okay, when I'm just sitting working, thinking, am I the only one dealing with this? Of course not. Other TMF'ers are. So just what are some things that you've done as leads in this space and working in this space that helps you stay, involved with the culture of TMF? Jared, should I start off with that?
Yeah, I hold just kind of open door, people can come to me with other questions they may have and just ask. There's no silly question that there should be ashamed to ask about the TMF, because again, we're the experts in the room. We know the TMF like the back of our hands, and so sometimes folks are intimidated. So it's really creating this warm space for people to feel like comfortable to come to you to ask those questions, and creating presentations as we spoke about before that's just engaging, that's remove some of those questions or concerns they may have, because for many outside, the TMF is like the Enigma machine, very confusing, but once you kind of break through the code, it's easy to understand. So just having that patience with your coworkers I find is a key way to engage them.
Great. Anusha?
I think a big part of culture is the attitude that you bring to the table, how enthusiastic you are about TMF and how willing you are to help, whether that's through office hours or one-on-ones or, going to study team meetings. Study team meeting presence brings about a huge culture change, because often everybody knows that TMF is like the last topic on the agenda, right? Like they save it till the end. Maybe we reach the hour and we don't quite get to TMF that day. But, really making sure you're using your seat at the table by going to those meetings and showing them metrics on how their study TMF is doing and getting the right people involved. That impacts culture, that changes culture. It's not just about us talking amongst ourselves about how things are great or things are terrible with the TMF, and then we, close our laptops, call it a day. That can't be it, right? It also has to be about what are we doing about it? What are the resources we have available? Do we have support for our systems? Do we have enough resources to support that kind of model? So constantly asking questions on how we can improve our presence is what's going to show that, and getting the right people involved. Because, some people like the details. Some people like to see, okay, what is the big picture? Maybe we need a little bit of both. But again, it's about how the attitude you're putting forward and the kind of personality that you're setting up for you and your team, especially if you're a leader of a TMF team at an organization. It's very important how it's viewed, how your team is functioning and what support that team is getting, and then how you can take that forward and influence the culture in the department. Because doing all this work but not having the right platform to share it means that it's not getting to the right people.
No, thank you, Anusha. Actually, as you were speaking, I was taking a look at our Q&A, and there was a question about breaking the illusion for non-TMF'ers that the ETM system is not working, engaging completeness. And I think a lot of the things you were speaking about, in my mind, kind of answers that question, right? If we have these tools that we're using, and like you say, not just saying, hey, everything's fine, we're putting it in there, we're good to go, but really actually giving some sort of metrics or feedback. That is, I think, one great way to kind of do that. And it's a part of building the culture and a part of also talking about the tools that we're using to kind of show what's happening, right? Because sometimes I think that, again, it tends to be a designee who actually works with the TMF, but, there might be a whole department responsible for what's in the TMF for that department, right? So then just kind of showcasing to those who aren't really in the day-to-day piece of it as well, what's happening sometimes is very telling. David, you want to add some more there?
Yeah, maybe just to say, and I kind of mentioned this before, but I think it's really important to establish the vision. Like, what's the sort of state that you want to be operating in, and make sure that that's got, that clear support, so that everybody's sort of marching towards that same. And then you can sort of use that as your platform to continuously improve, as Anusha said. Like, it's easy to get into that, like, everything's terrible, mindset. But if you take that platform and that vision and say, okay, let's take your feedback. How do I make this work better for you? How do we come together as a team and actually start to see, TMF groups or individuals as really helpful, super value add to the team, but also to show people like, this can also be a self-service value add to you as well, right? Like the TMF itself as a tool. So I think it's in the other piece that was mentioned was sort of around attitude and energy. I think that's a huge differentiator. And I sort of imagining with the way that Jared's describing TMF, that like his office hours have like couches and like lamps or something for people to come in and have like TMF therapy.
It's amazing.
But it's like, I mean, I really just, I can't agree with that strongly enough is just, you've got to lead and be the change that you want within the organization, right? I mean, it's huge, like bringing forth the value proposition, what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and just keep saying it, it's really important.
So maybe to kind of add on to that, so we're talking about these different aspects, maybe we've not experienced this yet, but what point do you kind of feel like culture has been achieved, right? So I recently was looking, I think it was on LinkedIn, Paul Fenton was talking about just TMF being a part of the culture in the sense that it's just an everyday thing. It's not just every now and then, you look in and it's really an everyday thing. At what point do we kind of feel like maybe we've achieved some culture, right? That we have a good buy-in, we have good visibility, people are talking about the TMF, but what are just some instances, maybe just some personal stories, if you can share, just around times where you felt like, yeah, we've got a good TMF culture. Anusha, if you want to start maybe with that.
Well, I will say, I think for me, it's about when people start to engage in conversations with you and show that they want to contribute without you having to ask them, remind them constantly. So especially when it comes to reviews of your TMF or metrics, that's one place where I've seen a lot of engagement. So recently, for example, we set up some dashboards and we wanted to show, this is what your quality queries look like. This is what your current document issue status, things like that, just to show what are the issues that we're noting within the TMF as documents are coming in and documents are being approved. We had team members reach out saying, I actually want to see this, or, or can we change something about that? Or if you have, if you set up health calls with your TMF, with your team, and they say, okay, I want to see this type of metric. I'm having this specific issue on, this section. So how do I address that? I think getting them to think and ask their questions before you give them solutions, that's when you see like that culture change and shift. So it's about how involved or invested are they. And I will say, I have not reached that state yet where I can say, yes, the TMF culture here is awesome. Because I think it's an ever-changing thing. Culture is not something that you achieve. It's something that you work towards constantly. So it's not like there's a day when we will all say TMF culture is amazing, but it's improvements on improvements over time. That also changes with how your organization change and what priorities are at the time, right? Priorities change for companies all the time. We may say, okay, we're placing priority on TMF now, so let's hire everybody in-house and fix everything. Maybe that decision changes and they say, okay, let's not do that. We can outsource this because we have that ability. We can't focus on it internally now. So that priority shift will also shift how your TMF culture shifts, right? The more internal people you have doing TMF work, the more exposure that TMF gets. When it's external, it may not be the same. It might look different. I'm not saying it would look bad or good, but it would look very different when it's managed externally versus internally. So those kinds of factors constantly change, will also change how your culture evolves over time. So I guess there's no like final state. It's constant evolution.
Great point. Jared?
I agree with what Anusha said. I think it's also, like we said earlier, like where the placement of the TMF is on the agenda, and do they hold the meetings for you to get your information in? And so I've seen that with different organizations that they will make that time for the TMF. They do want those metrics sent out specifically so they can address queries or any other issues that come up. But I agree really with what Anusha said. I can't add anything else.
Agreed. David, can you add anything else, or do you think we've covered that? Anything extra you want to add to that about the point where you feel like the culture has reached a good status?
Yeah, I think it's, if you have that culture of sort of openness and transparency and willingness to talk, as Anusha says, about the metrics, that's a pretty good place to be, right? Like they can really help inform your process, but I always sort of refer to metrics as like beacons, right? It sort of directionally gives you an idea of like how you're sitting, and letting people know that that's okay. That can be a conversation, should be a conversation, because we all have these nice eTMF systems now that you like push little buttons and it just tells you like, here's your metrics. But I caution people to say there's more to it than what that system is telling you, right? There's much more to it. And I think it's, you don't want to be in a situation where, again, I think I mentioned this before, you're showing it as like a, haha, I caught you. It's more like, hey, let's try to figure out what's happening here, So, but yeah, I think if there's transparency around the process and you're not fighting with quality all the time, that's a pretty good spot to be in.
Oh yes, our friends in quality. To add to that, so I definitely really enjoy what Anusha said about it being ever involved, ever changing. One thing that happened for me recently is I had someone outside the department ask me for some documents because that's where they wanted to obtain them, was the TMF, because they knew that was the correct space to look, right? Maybe these documents might be held elsewhere, but we know we need to come to the TMF because that's our actual source of record. And I was like, oh, that's a big win. That was a nice one, instead of hearing like, oh yeah, I don't need to see that document. I pulled it off my, desktop and used that. So I just felt like that was a good point where we have built some culture where at least, it's used as a reference as it should be, as we know.
Source of truth.
Source of truth, exactly. So I know we are coming up on the end of our discussion. Two final questions. These should be pretty quick answers. One is just, why do we think culture is so hard to build that TMF culture? Let's just start there. Why do we think this is hard? It shouldn't be hard, but why is it hard? And then I think we'll just kind of end with a quick lightning round of one word. But maybe quickly, Jared, if you just want to talk about why you think this is a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it's a shift from, the focus had always been the TMF at the end of the study, and now we're seeing we need this TMF throughout the study.
For sure. Now, Nisha, you want to add anything there?
I think it's really the challenge that I see most often is a lack of understanding. So that's where it can become challenging to influence culture. I think what we've all been saying so far is everybody needs to know why. If you don't know why, it's really hard to change that culture.
Sure. David?
Yeah, I mean, just really echoing the same, I guess, that it's hard because people don't understand why they're doing it. Like, they're executing their job because that's their job, and they're producing documents as a result of that, or they're producing end results or capturing data. And TMF is still like, oh, somebody's hitting me with a stick, so I have to put it in the TMF, right? So I think it's just sort of shifting that value proposition for people, and so people see it as as valuable. And that's a hard thing to do. And the other thing, and then maybe this is a bit controversial, I promise it'll be quick. I think there's also, depending on your organization, you may have to sort of accept that there are some functions, maybe they only contribute like one document, maybe they're never going to be a TMF'er, and that's okay. Like, you can't focus all your energy on the ones that sort of like are the outliers, but like maybe low risk, like focusing your energy on the areas that you can sort of push change in is a good place to start.
No, perfect. Okay, just a little quick lightning round here. I think we have a minute to go. Just one word on TMF culture. If we just want to add in just one thing that we think that is needed, I'll go first. I just think consistency is needed to help the TMF culture. David?
Accountability.
Anusha?
Transparency.
Mm. Great one. And I think we may have lost Jared. I'm not sure.
We did. We lost Jared, but maybe he'll pop back in. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But we're right at the end.
His word, because I knew. I mean, he was coming with the words the whole time. And maybe he's already contributed his word.
That's it. He's run out of good analogies and phrases. Guys, that was amazing. I really, really enjoyed being an attendee to that session. You can tell that everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did, because the chat was on fire, the Q&A was on fire, there was emojis flying across the screen at every moment. So super, super, super awesome. I think one of the things I'll take away from this is that, when it comes to TMF culture, we've really got to think about that there's people behind these processes, right? And you've got to change the hearts and minds before you try and focus on anything else. I'm loving the analogies and the phrases and the controversial points, looking at culture from a risk perspective, David. I thought that was amazing. I think these are all really, really great suggestions. I love also that everybody is saying TMF'er now. That's just my favorite takeaway from this. And I know our team is super excited about that as well. So thanks everybody for an absolutely amazing session. Panelists, you were awesome as expected. And I would love to get you guys back into another session next year. For everybody that attended live, thanks so much. You can, of course, listen back to the presentation at the end of today. All of the recordings will be available. If you do have additional questions for anybody, the lounge will be open, or it actually is open now. So maybe some of our panelists will head over to the lounge and you can ask those questions directly to them. Robin, Anusha, David, and Jared, who he's no longer here, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.